last week on Legally Kidnapped.
Good evening. Our top story this week. Starting this October, CPS agents in Connecticut will be required to give parents a written notice of their rights, roughly comparable to the Miranda warnings that police give to crime suspects. In Michigan this week, special needs foster kids are being abused and neglected in group homes. A judge in Kentucky is considering the request of the state's two largest newspapers to force social service officials to release the records related to child abuse deaths. System sucks in Rhode Island are upset over the state's move towards a more family preservationist approach to child protection, and Indiana cuts the pay of foster parents. In Illinois, the death of a 4-year-old foster kid back in May is ruled a homicide. A state senator from Chicago gets a bill passed and signed into law giving CPS agents the right to obtain your personal information in abuse investigations without reasonable suspicion. And the head of Illinois' DCF announces his resignation. CPS agents in New York continue the practice of snatching children from parents busted for minor marijuana infractions this week, more so from black families than white. In Florida, experts are pushing for disclosure of failed adoptions in the state where the parents give up custody of special needs kids after being lied to by CPS agents as to the severity of the kids' conditions. And in light of recent systematic failures resulting in the untimely deaths of children, Florida's new DCF director examines new ways to protect kids in the state. In Washington, a group of foster kids who are separated from their brothers and sisters in the foster care system get to spend a whole week together at a summer camp. A study released by the National Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse claims that teenagers who use Facebook are more likely to drink or use drugs than are kids who don't. Another new study reveals that approximately 5,200 kids fall out of windows every year. Texas Congressman Ron Paul reintroduces the Parental Consent Act, which prohibits federal funding for forced mental health evaluations on children. And the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services website claims that children are sexual beings. In Sweden this week, a complaint is filed against a CPS agent who taunted a family who was awaiting deportation because they were overweight. In Norway, a private eye rescues kids from the country's foster care system, returning them to their parents, usually to be reunited in Poland. Talks have stalled in an international custody case where a mother rescued a kid from a foster home in Nevada and hightailed it to Mexico. In Germany this week, an 11-year-old boy calls the police and rats out his mother for making him do chores. And in New Zealand, a 72-year-old foster mother is done after being prosecuted for being unable to get her truant foster kid to go to school, even after the judge throws it out of court. In Australia this week, an archbishop denies reports of forced adoption practices at Catholic-run hospitals. An Australian child protective agency loses its contract over a series of alleged incidents at one of its homes. Child protective groups are upset after a man who killed his son with a blow to the stomach is permitted to coach children again, and Australian foster kids are still being bounced from home to home throughout the foster care system. In Canada, three sisters reunite 50 years after being separated by foster care and adoption. A Canadian legal scholar writes a book that argues that multinational corporations are running wild and boosting profits by drugging, poisoning, and brainwashing kids from a very young age. A teenager who sexually assaulted a girl in a foster home gets 2 years probation, and an autistic girl is stolen from her father by Canadian CPS agents and forcibly placed on 3 different antipsychotics. A man from Niagara Falls gets 18 months for extorting $90,000 from a Catholic priest who is afraid of being falsely accused of sexual abuse. The government of Alberta commits $1.5 million to create a new independent body that will strengthen child protection services, and Alberta CPS agents complain about their caseloads. In England this week, the government considers a countrywide ban on internet pornography, and a convicted child pornographer helps to overturn a law which prevents people who look at child porn from being alone with minors on the basis that it breaches their human rights. British child abuse investigator is jailed for leaking information to the press regarding a high-profile child abuse case where the mother fled to Ireland. In that same case, a British MP is accused of abusing parliamentary privilege for defending the woman in her child abuse case, where she was later denounced by a judge as a liar. And a British foster parent gets 6 years for raping a 24-year-old woman. In entertainment news this week, singer Christina Aguilera is pissed and ready to sue over child abuse allegations made on on a website. Conservative radio talk show host goes on the Sean Hannity program on Fox News and condones beating children as an appropriate form of punishment. Mel and Oksana finally come to a child custody agreement. The woman from Alaska who abused a Russian orphan who she adopted by force-feeding him hot sauce is convicted of child abuse. And Dr. Phil is getting blamed as well for making her tape the abuse in order to get her on the show. In California, a CPS safety monitor who was approved by CPS agents to be a caregiver for a 4-month-old girl is arrested after it is revealed that the baby had 14 broken bones and a cigarette burn. An adopted 6-year-old in Colorado tells investigators that she was forced to eat her meals in a bathroom. In Delaware, a pediatrician and former expert witness in child abuse cases gets 14 life sentences for sexually abusing children in his office. And a mom from Southwest Florida has been busted for calling in false child abuse reports. In Iowa, a woman gets a suspended sentence for running an adoption scam. A foster mother from Montana is arrested for beating and leaving a 3-year-old in a hot car where she died. In New Mexico, a CPS agent is charged after throwing a wild party which included drugs, alcohol, and underage kids. And a worker for a juvenile detention facility in New Mexico is busted for bringing a crack pipe to work. In Maryland, a child psychologist pleads guilty to sexual abuse. In Kentucky, a former employee of a group home is facing sodomy and sexual abuse charges. And in Oklahoma, the preliminary hearing continues for a cop who is accused of sexually abusing his foster son, with the alleged victim admitting that he made the whole thing up. In Florida this week, the anti-abuse people are up in arms after a man who is a registered sex offender gets custody of his daughter. In Oregon, a $25.5 million lawsuit is filed against the Tough Love School for Troubled Teens, which stands accused of child abuse. In Texas, a judge orders a gay father to keep his biological kids away from his husband. And in Nebraska, a real mom attempts to rescue her daughter from a foster home and is hunted down by police and later caught in New Mexico. A Mormon bishop from Utah who also works as a vice president for a school board is accused of failing to report child abuse. A CPS agent from Virginia is facing drug charges. 4 foster kids from Washington are suing the state for placing them in a foster home where they were sexually and physically abused for years. And finally, tonight, a man from Idaho is facing jail time for killing a grizzly bear who was threatening his kids. For these stories and all the latest dirt on the child protective industry, visit www.legallykidnapped.com. And until next week, this is Baby LK, over and out.